The chairs are a little wobbly.
I almost crushed the chair.
Hey.
Well, hello, everyone. And I wanted to say hello to everyone online. This is being live streamed this afternoon. My name is Ian Miller, and I'm the Chief Scientist at the National Geographic Society. And it's a thrill to be here hosting this panel here at the Nature Pavilion alongside the Nature Conservancy, with whom we at the National Geographic share a deep commitment to protecting the planet. And personally, I'm really excited to moderate this session, which is all about elevating the voices of young people. And I think we can all agree that this is an essential moment to do just that. And that's the way we're going to tackle climate change, because they are, quite simply, the future. So for me, it's really one of the most fulfilling parts of my job, being able to work with young people who are dedicating their lives to save the planet, not only for the planet, but for all its inhabitants. And here today, we're, of course, joined with a few folks in person here in Egypt, but we have this big group online. And this group really exemplifies what National Geographic is all about. So we're a global nonprofit, and we focus on illuminating and protecting the wonder of the world. And we do that through science, storytelling, education, and exploration. And we fund people, we have grantees, and we call them explorers. So our explorers work in over 140 countries and work on all kinds of things, from securing major protections for land and in the oceans to address climate change and biodiversity loss. But we also have people working in emerging fields like that of space environmentalism as low Earth orbit becomes increasingly commercialized and occupied. But today, 42% of the world population is under the age of 25. And so we know that young people hold this key to a sustainable future for a thriving planet. So the National Geographic invests in young people in a number of different ways. We have a special category for young explorers between the ages of 18 and 25. These inspirational and next generation change makers are really focused on overcoming challenges and leading solutions for a healthier, safer, and sustainable planet. And so I'm really pleased that you're going to hear from two of them here today. They're sitting next to us. So in addition to awarding grants, we engage young people through externships, which are career development opportunities for individuals also in that same age class, 18 to 25, all around the world. And we offer these externships in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And you'll hear a lot more about this from Jen here in just a minute. So we also know that changemakers are younger sometimes than 18. If you've been walking around COP in the last few days, you should have noticed that. But we have just started a new global slingshot challenge with the Paul Allen Foundation. And this program is specifically available to young people ages 13 to 18 to engage with the National Geographic Society on environmental issues, including identifying solutions to make our world a better place. And the winners of the Slingshot Challenge secure prizes up to about $10,000, so I encourage you to check it out if you're interested. So alongside the Nature Conservancy, the National Geographic Society is committed to fostering a more inclusive and sustainable planet, and we know that starts with the youth. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be here with this group. So I'm joined by Jen Morris there on the end. She is the CEO of the Nature Conservancy. And Sophia Kianni right here just to my right. And Eyal Weintraub, he's just our last fellow right there. And these two young people here are National Geographic Young Explorers and Youth Climate Leaders. So to kick us off here, I'd like to start with you, Jen, and ask you if you would share your thoughts on the role of young people in addressing climate change, as well as your perspective on COP27 and TNC's role during this conference.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. Hi, everybody. As you can tell, I'm not one of the youth up here, but I will say that this is just thrilling for me to be with these incredible young explorers. We often hear the term, the youth are the future, but we know the youth are the now. And to have this program, this collaboration with National Geographic just makes me incredibly happy to be part of the Nature Conservancy and part of this effort to really highlight and celebrate the efforts of youth to change the world, because that's exactly what we need to be doing, is listening to your voices and supporting your voices to make change. And I understand that Sophia did an incredible speech. Was that this morning? Or yesterday, which I haven't heard, but I've been told that it is one of the best speeches that you'll ever hear. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely find her. She did the opening speech, the plenary yesterday, so it's really making a lot of buzz around here. So just to set the stage, so recent statistics are telling us that 89% of teens actually regularly think about the environment. 89%. I have a 15-year-old, and she's constantly coming to me and saying, like, Mom, it's really hot today. You are not working hard enough. So I know mine certainly is one of that 89%. And 9 out of 10 Gen Zers are actually making an effort to protect the environment. I can tell you that was not true in my generation. So the fact that we have this upswelling of efforts by the Gen Z is absolutely incredible. So what we do with these internships are these externships, and first of all, I just want to say there's many people in the room here, but we have many people online, and this session is really also to celebrate this externship program. This externship program, I will say, has been one of the coolest things that I've seen the Nature Conservancy be a part of, and especially with an incredible brand like National Geographic. So what this basically is, it's targeting 18 to 25-year-olds. We have 400 young people who've come from 90 countries, and this thing has grown exponentially in the last couple of years. We've been supporting 22 youth-led community projects around the world, and the whole goal is to really, again, lift up youth voices, but also to have them share their stories, to learn marketing and communication skills so they can be effective champions of conservation from their communities. And so with the two brands up here, National Geographic and the Nature Conservancy, we're doing whatever we can to actually do that, to give them the training and the skills necessary on media, on communications, writing skills, whether it's PowerPoint presentations, but more importantly, getting their voices out in a powerful way. Our 5-year plan is actually to engage 5,000 people in this, so 5,000 youth, 18 to 25-year-olds, and to invest in 500 youth-led community projects around the world. So that's a big goal, and we're actually doing a phenomenal job getting there. And I'll just say a couple words about the Nature Conservancy. We are also very dedicated to youth engagement. We've doubled the amount of funding that we provided to youth programs in the last couple of years. And we have a phenomenal outlet tool for educating youth around environmental issues called Nature Lab, which is reaching over 1 million youth all over the world. So check that out. It's very compelling, multilingual education materials that are easy to use. You asked me, Ian, about COP and why we are here. So maybe some of my impressions. It's been an interesting COP. I've been here since Saturday, and it's definitely been a bit chaotic at times. But I will say that one of the things that give me some hope is the fact that, one, this is an implementation COP, that two, that we're seeing real solutions. We had an interesting greening sovereign debt session just a couple hours ago here, and we're seeing that there are actually not only very clear examples where we can make a difference and have success, but also radical collaborations. We did a session earlier today called Enduring Earth, where we're celebrating the collaboration between multiple organizations who often compete with each other to come together and collaborate. And so those are just a couple of examples of things that give me hope. We got a lot to do in the next week to get some real clear targets and progress forward on things like loss and damage. We've got a lot to do there, but I'm feeling pretty hopeful in this minute, although I am exhausted. So I'm going to stop talking now and give the floor to our youth.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was fantastic. Yes, indeed. Let's give the floor to our youth here. And so I just want to take a moment to introduce both of these young geographic explorers. They're both climate leaders. We have Sophia Kianni here just to my right, and then just beyond her is Eyal Weintraub. And just a bit about each of these young explorers. First, Sophia is studying climate change and public policy at Stanford University. She is the founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals. an international nonprofit with 8,000 volunteers in more than 40 countries working to translate climate information into over 100 languages. She represents the United States as the youngest member of the inaugural United Nations Youth Advisory Group on climate change. And I think that might have been what you were doing the other day, which is wonderful. Eyal, let me get my bio here, is a climate activist, international relations student, and first-generation member of the Fratelli Tutti Public School for Young International Leaders. He is one of the co-founders of Youth for Climate Argentina. This climate organization has mobilized over 100,000 people in Argentina and has been essential in approving environmental laws in his country. So I want to start with Sophia. And Sophia, if you would, we heard just a little bit about your panel the other day, and it's getting a lot of buzz, and you sort of had a mic drop moment, I think, at the end there. But could you share some of your thoughts on COP27 so far, and why is COP important?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the biggest things that I've really stressed at this COP is looking at it through my perspective as an Iranian American, where this is a particularly significant COP because we are in the Middle East right now, where temperatures are rising more than twice the global average, and Iran, where my family is from, is among the most climate vulnerable nations in the entire world. And yet Iran is responsible for just over 1% of global emissions, while the United States, where I'm living, is responsible for 25%, and yet we are not experiencing the same impacts. And I think one of the biggest calls to action that I've seen from other youth leaders, including myself, is that we really are pushing for the creation of this loss and damage fund, because we do think that nations like the United States have an obligation to the developing world to really be funding adaptation and mitigation efforts and making sure that we are, like someone said something the other day that really resonated with me. Another youth activist said, if you break it, you have to pay for it. And I think that has really been a resounding call to action from young people of, we have seen what we have done, and world leaders need to hold themselves responsible and really commit to climate finance. Because if this COP is about getting things done, then money is the only way that we can do that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Eyal, the same question to you. Could you offer some thoughts on why attending COP27 is so important and what you're up to here?
Yeah, definitely. COP is a very interesting place. We need radical transformations, we need a radical action, yet it's very difficult to achieve a radical decision making when the way you make those decisions is among the consensus of the 195 nations that are part of the conference. Yet at the same time, if these international conferences didn't exist, then at this point the decisions would be made in Washington, D.C. or Beijing, basically. And so those are some of the contradictions that we have to lead with as youth activists, as young advocates coming here to these places, occupying positions where hopefully we can try to make a difference, try to achieve some transformations. I'm really excited that for this year, finally, loss and damages wasn't the agenda. I completely agree with what Sophia was saying, that in order to enact change, speeches and words are very fine and necessary, but at the end of the day, we need you to show us the money. And that's true for statewide transformation, but it's also very true for young climate activists. That just yesterday, I was at a panel organized by the Youth Advisory Group, in which Sophia is in, talking about how less than 1% of international climate funds international climate grants from different foundations go to youth-led movements, go to youth climate organizations. And at the same time, it's us youth climate organizations that in the last few years have managed to really install in the agenda the importance of solving and fighting and finding solutions to the climate and ecological crisis. Of course, recognizing the need for intergenerational collaboration and standing on the shoulders of the generations that preceded us in order to really pave the way for us to get where we're going. But in that sense, I am excited that this COP of the Egyptian presidency, with all the contradictions that brings in terms of human rights violations, is really pushing forward the agenda in terms of mitigation, which is really necessary, adaptation, but especially loss and damages, because loss and damages is basically historical reparations. It's recognizing that the development of industrialized countries and the higher quality of life in the global north is paid with the resources and blood, sweat, and tears of the global south. And that the same way that the global south has a financial debt with the global north has an environmental debt with the global south. And we need to start recognizing that and paying up.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So I'd love to ask each of you, COP's only been going for about 4 days, but if there are one or two takeaways that you've seen on the ground, Jen, you mentioned a couple of things that have been happening in the last couple of days, meetings you've been part of. But if there are a few that you would just like to share with the audience, maybe I could start with you, Jen, and just offer a couple of takeaways, and we'll move through the group.
Sure. So I think what's interesting about this COP is also how close it is to the next COP, which is, of course, the biodiversity COP. And you're here in the Nature Pavilion. This is all about the connections between nature, climate, and, of course, biodiversity. And I think we have to constantly remember the role that nature plays in the climate crisis, but also not forgetting the role of course, biodiversity. So that for me is what I love about this collaboration amongst about 80 organizations here. We did this in Glasgow, but this is a much grander stage that we have. And, just to keep in mind that, again, similar to the loss and damage discussion, is that nature represents 30% of the solution, but receives less than 10% of the funding. And some of the most important nature in the world is, of course, in the global south. The most vulnerable communities, of course, are in the global south. So I agree, there has to be much, much more investment. I think you guys said it well. I won't even try to reproduce your words, but we absolutely have got to be investing in reparations for the fact of all the damage that we have done. So that would be my impression, Ian, so far.
That's wonderful. All right. Eyal, how about you? A takeaway from the first couple of days here, 4 days, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, negotiations between the World Leaders Summit that happened the first few days, negotiations have kind of basically started yesterday, so it's still a bit early to see how that's going. But in terms of my personal experience at COP, I heard last year when I was here, Hala, the CEO of B Team, I'm not going to pronounce her last name because I really can't, that accountants are going to save us in terms of how we need to start really following the supply chain of different companies, how we need to raise the ambition in terms of carbon tax and develop the carbon market. And something that I've been thinking in the last few days, I thought that was quite a good one-liner, accountants are going to save us. I would like to add that I think personal relationships are right there needed in the formula. Advocacy at COP is a big part, in not only, of course, but personal relationships are extremely necessary in that sense. We need to, of course, create collective movement. We need collective action. But collective organizations can't withstand the pass of time without personal relationships to be able to basically deal with egos that happen a lot of the time in terms of collective organizations. We need personal relationships in order to get all the actors around the round table and have deep, honest conversations about where we are, where we were, and where we need to go. And in that sense, without trust, without bonds, we won't be able to have those real, deep connections that are necessary in order for us to be able to connect existing power with emerging power and create that synergy to be able to leverage real transformation and change in the 7 years we have in order to be able to reach 45% reduction of emissions by 2030. And in that sense, something that I've learned in the last COP and this one is that personal relationships, the people we meet, the connections that endure the pass of time are going to save us, hopefully.
All right, thank you. So Sophia's going to need to leave here in just a brief moment. She's got another engagement. So I'm going to ask you two questions at once. I'd love to hear your takeaways just from the first couple of days, but I'd also love for you to reflect on what it means to elevate young voices and their role in tackling climate change.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from COP has been that people are increasingly looking at this as an intersectional issue, which is something that young people have been pushing for years, in the sense that finally being able to be given a platform to talk about the fact that the climate crisis is also a human rights crisis. In Iran right now, young women are leading a human rights revolution, and the reality is that the impacts of the climate crisis, the droughts, the flooding that we're seeing is contributing to the political instability in areas like the Middle East, where water mismanagement in the region is being exacerbated by droughts. And so talking about those issues, and also talking about the fact that climate crisis is going to be the defining narrative of human health as well. So talking about the impacts of air pollution and the fact that the climate crisis is exacerbating air pollution, and millions of children are dying every single year because air pollution disproportionately impacts them because their lungs are developing. It impacts them when they're still fetuses. And so for me to be able to stress those two messages, I think, around this being a health crisis, this being a human rights crisis, also talking about it from a gender perspective as well, around the fact that 80% of climate refugees are women. And so there's such a need for us to talk about the fact that it's people of color, children, women, marginalized communities that are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So when we're talking about solutions, we need to make sure that these people have a seat at the decision-making table when it comes to coming up with the solutions that are going to define what their communities look like, but then B, really continuing to advocate for solutions that make sure we're tackling issues like environmental racism and like the issues that I've mentioned.
Well, thank you very much. And I think we should give Sophia a round of applause and let her go to her next engagement. Thank you so much. So we make sure she gets on time to the next thing she's going to do here. I'm going to scoot over. We have just a couple more questions. And these questions come from our externs. These were questions that were submitted beforehand. And so the first one, if I could ask you to answer it, Jen. This is from Ricardo Bowen, and he's a recent political science graduate and conservation advocate based in Copenhagen. And he asks, how can we move to a more just and sustainable society that ensures everyone has the resources to adapt to an ever-changing environment while simultaneously maintaining access to essential human resources such as water, housing, and food?
That's a really good question. That's kind of the central question is how do we sustain our current population, our growing population, while also ensuring the sustainability of the planet. So I think the first, and that was said here before, but I think one of the first answers is, of course, we have to have local people at the table when these decisions are made. That the solutions that the Nature Conservancy, National Geographic, and many other organizations are trying to come up with have to be grounded in what communities need to be. So many times decisions are made at governments that are far, far, far away from where those decisions can really impact the most numbers of people. And if we don't have people on the ground that are listening, that are trying to understand what the complexity of those things, whether it's, degraded farmland because of drought conditions or inappropriate uses of pesticides, et cetera, and understand what the impacts of those changes will be on their own livelihoods, then that's when I think we are not doing service to the local communities and places that we work. So that would be part of an answer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And just one last question here, and this is from Gabriela Tejada, who is also an extern. And if you could answer this one, Eyal. Gabriela asks, how can we use creative technologies and media to educate and inspire collaboration between the world's climate leaders, especially during major events like COP27, where these leaders find themselves all in one place?
That's a really interesting question. Well, I work a lot in tech ed and communication. And one of the complicated things of getting people interested in climate and environmental communication is how can we get those huge figures, 500 million climate refugees by 2050, to really penetrate someone's mind and stop becoming a statistic. Because sadly, one death is a tragedy, but a million is a statistic, and it's just, we get lost in all of the numbers. And in that sense, it's impossible to care, to fight for something that we don't know, for people we have never heard of, And in that sense, I believe in the power of storytelling and the power of communication. And I think that technology, like for example, virtual reality, augmented reality, can take us to places where we've never been, so that we can get to know these places and especially these people. And once we develop these personal relationships, these personal connections to the land and to its inhabitants, that can fuel and make sure that we persevere in demanding radical change and do not become conservative along the way in our reivindications and the transformations that we're demanding and implementing as well. A very interesting example of that actually is the UN Museum's live portals that are somewhere, actually I think today is the last day, in which they developed 30 portals all over the world in which you can have a live conversation with climate activists or people involved in the climate world in different parts like Johannesburg and Buenos Aires and North America, 30 places all over the country. And so people at COP in this conference can have a conversation with the people that are suffering environmental violence firsthand to try to make sure that local communities are in the tables where decisions are made. I think that that's, for example, one interesting example of how communication and technology can help bridge the gaps and create personal connections.
All right, that's awesome. So we just have a couple of more minutes here, and I'll just ask both our panelists, Jen and Eyal, to offer some closing remarks and maybe a call to action. So Eyal, maybe I'll start with you, and I'll ask you to finish, Jen. Go ahead.
Sure. We need to help foment capability building in young leaders. We need existing power to champion and open doors for us to be able to find the resources and the funding we need and the mentoring as well and the context. It's not only about the money, to be able to implement the initiatives that we're developing, especially for young activists in the Global South. And I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm a white male. I'm an extremely privileged person in the Global South. I'm here at COP. It's extremely difficult to find the resources we need in order to implement all the initiatives that we are activating in the ground all over Latin America. And in that sense, we just need someone to open the door. We can do the rest. So we know how to pitch. We have beautiful decks. We have amazing programs and projects and initiatives and movement building capabilities all over the region. We need people to champion us and introduce us to those people who can help finance our initiatives, who can open doors so that we can really scale up and accelerate the rate of change, because we don't have enough time to do anything else.
Awesome, thank you. And Jen, if I could ask you to have...
I don't really want to follow that, to be honest. That was fantastic. I guess I would say get out of your comfort zone. I think if there's anything I've learned in my career is that when we sort of stay in our own institutions and our own peer networks and just work with people that are our own age, we don't learn, we don't grow, we don't challenge ourselves to think new things and to go farther and to actually create solutions that maybe the world hasn't thought of. So that would be my call to action. Get out of your silo.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, and it was wonderful to have Sophia as well. And a special thank you to everybody who's joining us online. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. There are many ways to learn about what the Nature Conservancy and the National Geographic Society are doing, and there'll be a slide behind here. And if you're interested, take a picture. You can reach out to these people. But please help me thank the panelists one last time. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
Great job. Yes.